Hello, so today I want to continue talking about what I was saying yesterday about how I'm kind of like tired of waiting for things to happen. And basically, yesterday I was talking a lot about complacency, and today I wanted to talk about how sometimes I think I've been way too passive, but this is the type of thing that I really didn't want to admit to myself. I didn't want to see myself as passive, because that for me I made this association with that meaning weakness. So I didn't want to be weak, so I had to always impose myself. And to be fair, there's a lot of times where I did where that kind of like was like the big thing that was happening is just like me imposing myself. But there are also examples of me kind of like taking a step back and not really being the most proactive person. I talked about this, yesterday when I was referring to religion and how I grew up religious, and there's this notion that like God will provide, God will kind of like guide you, and you just have to kind of like follow the path. And basically, what that meant, to me is that sometimes, because I think that for example when I was in high school, it was much easier for me to kind of like feel productive because all I had to do was study. So I was studying at school, and it was also my technical course, going together with my high school experience. And also I was kind of like going out of my way to read and acquire knowledge and all that, because when you're in high school, kind of like your the expectations for you, for the things that you do, a lot of it has to do with school, and I was doing well in school, so it was easy for me to just be like, okay, so I'm doing well, I'm kind of like I'm not um, falling behind basically. But then I graduated, and what ended up occurring was that I couldn't, there was the issue that it was like I couldn't really, because I think I talked about this yesterday, like I was experiencing burnout, and I was also starting to have more serious episodes of depression. So I was struggling to get things done, and sometimes I didn't really know what I had to do, and that in itself is kind of like a charged topic because on one hand I'm like, okay, I was a kid, like I just makes sense that I might not really know what to do. But on the other hand, like I feel like, I mean, at least right now I look back and I'm like, there were more things that I could have done. But as I said, like that is pretty much with the power of hindsight, and also with my experience as like I've been an adult legally for a decade. So I've had many experiences, and that has kind of like led to me having a different perspective on different situations. Also, it doesn't help that basically what I was really trying to accomplish back when I was 18, like I ended up like abandoning that. Not abandoning because I gave up, it's just that I tried my best and it didn't work out, and then it turned out that like I wanted that thing for its own sake, but because it would kind of like fit into a fantasy that I had. So like I ended up finding a different path, and it is a path that I'm happier and healthier than ever. So like I think I'm on the right track basically, at least given what I kind of like expect of myself these days, because I'm much gentler with myself. I'm kind of like much more receptive of my own limitations. I kind of like, and also like, I think I'm striking a balance of like not being too not kind of like sheltering myself too much. I'm kind of like putting myself out there, but it's still like knowing my limits. That is kind of like what this is all about. I kind of like, I know how much I can do and how far I can go, and I respect myself, and I respect like this boundaries that I set for myself. And basically, like it is one of those things that it's only you kind of like achieve that by practicing. So I've been practicing for like a decade. Even when I wasn't directly trying to kind of like get to the point I am at right now, I was still trying to improve. I was trying to be better, but like not only like academically, or not with things related to work and projects that I had professionally, but also like personally, kind of like me with myself. I wanted to do better. I wanted to do things in a way that was appropriate, because as I talked about before, I think a lot of the burnout that I experienced is because I was demanding too much from myself. I was kind of yeah, like I kind of was demanding more than it was humanly possible for me to give. And but I couldn't really face that because to me it felt like I was admitting defeat. Felt like I was admitting a level of weakness from my part. So it took me a while for me to break free from this mold that I had established for myself. But talking about like I'm tired of waiting for things. Basically, I feel like for me to get to the point right now where I'm like I have achieved balance, I had to kind of like go from like one extreme to the other. So I definitely feel like I don't resent myself for this, but I'm thinking about, for example, the past 5 years, and there's like a lot that happened, and there's a lot that I can't really I know, I think that I might have not done enough, but it's also the fact that I was resting, like, and that is, something that like doctors really prescribed me. I had to rest for a variety of reasons, and but yeah, so I think I wasn't doing enough, and also I was kind of lost. For example, college is a good example. I am right now in the second semester of this new degree that I'm pursuing in archival sciences, and I'm finally kind of like actually engaged with college since 2019. 2022, like recently, I wasn't really, wasn't doing as much as I could, or I was kind of like lost, in which I was doing things, but I was like, why am I doing this? I don't want to conclude this course, like this degree. So I was kind of like there were some drawbacks, but also like I can kind of like admit, I'm thinking of 2020 and 2021. I think that I kind of like let myself go in terms of my academic performance. I really gave up in a certain way, and I can't really get that time back. But I don't look at myself, I don't have no resentment towards my younger self, because it took me kind of like going, kind of like walking in circles in some of like these like majors that I was kind of like trying to achieve, that for me to get to the point where I found something that I'm passionate about, and I really wanna, I want this to work out very well, I want this very much. I really want to succeed. So I'm doing my best. I'm doing a lot of reading. All the texts that my professors have been kind of like adding to like the app that we use to kind of like conduct things. Like I'm reading everything, and I think that is how things. I don't know, I feel like I'm going, I won't say that I'm going above and beyond, because that is a little too much, but I am, kind of like doing more than the bare minimum, and this is kind of like a victory in this area, and it comes from like me finding, finding the right path for me. So everything I tried before that, affected me in one way or another, yeah, I don't look at that resentfully. I'm like, yeah, this was a part of this. I had to try different things for me to get to, one thing that I actually enjoy. It's interesting how, these things work out, because I had no idea, like this major that I right now, like archival sciences, I had no idea that it existed before this year, and I just went on it because it was like, sounds interesting. I wasn't even necessarily planning on continuing, but after the first semester, I'm like, I'm gonna graduate in this thing. I'm gonna find work in this area, and I'm gonna have a fulfilling life. I'm gonna find fulfillment in my job, which is something that I had kind of like given up, for a while. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna just here for the money, because we need money to survive. So I was just doing that. But right now I'm like, you know what? No, I can find something that is fulfilling, and it's going to be challenging, just like any other job. But I think that I'll be able to kind of like adjust myself, to the different situations, and I will know what to do. So there's that. But back to the whole thing of like me not wanting to kind of like wait and more for things to happen. I think that I'm looking at myself like 18 to 21. I was very much in that. I had that mentality. I didn't realize that was happening because I was doing some things. I was kind of like doing what was my part. Although, in hindsight, I'm like, I could have maybe done more, or maybe not more, but I could have like worked things out better. I could have kind of like, things could have worked out differently in a way. And ultimately, like, I once again, I don't have that, sorrow for, like the things that weren't, like the things that never happened according to how I wanted. I think that I found myself, at this point in time, I think everything is working out very well for me. So I can kind of like say confidently that like, it's okay that those, all those projects, those plans, they didn't work out, because, you could say it's not meant to be. I don't really think that there's a force that is kind of like controlling these things. So, but it is kind of like, it is what happens, I think things have a way of like figuring themselves out, and sometimes you're there for the ride, like you can make things happen, or because also like there's a lot of like trial and error, so you're just throwing a lot of things at the wall and just waiting to see what sticks. And I think that is a process that I have come to kind of like accept, and not accept, like look forward to, like trying new things, seeing where it lands me, because that's kind of like the joy of living, like it's trying things. And it's not just about that. I know this is cliche as fuck, but like it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. And sometimes like we get anxious, we really just want to get to the destination, but it takes time and effort. So you have to find something for you to do something fulfilling, something that makes you content in the process of getting there. And I'm at a point where I'm trying to enjoy, for example, back to, school. I'm trying to enjoy myself in a way that I might not have enjoy before, in the previous, things that I tried to study, like in this one, I'm trying to enjoy the process of learning and of, of learning. I think that this is something that I lost. I used to be very, involved and, really enjoy learning. I'm thinking about myself in middle school and high school, and then, adulthood came and I lost, the spark. So I'm kind of like trying to get that back, enjoy learning. Because sometimes, like, for example, I'm reading a lot of texts, as I said, a lot of essays, a lot of articles, lots of, like book chapters, and sometimes, the full book. And, it's all knowledge, and I don't want it to feel like it is pointless. I want to kind of like engage with this and see kind of like what I can get from that. Because, for example, I have this subject, this class, it is culture and information, and this is one that I'm having a lot of readings to do, and we're talking about anthropology right now, and some of ethnography and stuff like that. And my teacher, my professor, she kind of like added a lot of like different texts that we can read, and there's going to be a mandatory reading like every week, and I'm kind of like looking forward to that right now, actually. I think when she said that, I was like, can I handle this? But right now I'm like, yes, I can handle this. And not only that, I'm gonna learn, I'm really going to I'm gonna do a good job. There is like an assignment, a group project that we have to do, and this for the end of my group's for the end of October. But I already started studying and reading the text and like doing some research and preparing like a presentation, and like I want to keep this energy up. I want to, because also like there is this fear, that this anxiety that comes from like you not knowing whether you're going to be able to handle it or not. And when you start working, that kind of like dissipates a little bit, even if you realize that something might take more, it's going to be more work than you imagined, than you anticipated. Like, still, I think that concrete actions, they really help with anxiety and with fear. So that's pretty much what I'm trying to do, even if it isn't just in the thing that I was doing, where I'm trying to express my gratitude for the things that I have. And we kind of like had a little lesson yesterday. My parents and some of their friends, with some of which, like, I guess I could also call them my friends. The only reason why I wouldn't is because they're kind of like in their 50s, 60s, so like I'm in my late 20s. But like I think we had no directions that I can also call them my friends. But the point I'm trying to make is that we watched the first half an hour of the fourth Shrek movie, Shrek Forever After, and it was interesting because basically then like one of the friends that was kind of like the one who would kind of like it's not a lecture, but like it is it's also, I think that was just more from to call it a service, but he would have a little moment. He was going to make the connection between that movie and like the religious aspect of that meeting, and he's talking about murmuring, and it kind of like he brought connecting with the movie, and also kind of like giving some context in the Bible and all that. And something that he said is that gratitude kind of like combats this energy of murmuring, and this is something that like for me it is also applicable, because even if I don't want to be involved with religion or anything, it's still like something that I've been doing and that it's been happening, been helping, and basically like it just, so I think that acknowledging the things you're grateful for also constitutes an action, so yeah, actions, they kind of like combat fear in a way. So you have to do something about it, even if like that thing doesn't really work out, it doesn't really help you the way that you kind of like thought it would. It's still it kind of like suits things, and it kind of like goes back to what I was saying the other day, that it doesn't have to be like a 0 or 100 thing. It can be like a 5% thing, a 50% thing, and like that is improvement, and that helps, because it's kind of like the thing about different infinites. Like some infinites are kind of like larger, bigger than others, so pretty much that. So like it's better for you to be even if like it's like a very small thing, like that is still worth a shot. Like you should still kind of like it's worth it, basically. But yeah, so I kind of like ended up not talking as much as I wanted about like waiting for things, but all of this it comes from it stems from like this situation. So I think the next video I'm gonna record is going to be me talking a little bit more about this, because this has been kind of like healing for me. I'm kind of it's part of progress. But that's it. So anyways, bye.